Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I'm your host, Jeff Howard, and I am very excited about this podcast because I have filmmaker Peter Menchini with me. Hey, Peter.
Hello.
And we are on Zoom, which means apologies if the sound quality isn't perfect. You know, sometimes with Zoom, we don't sound great or there could be a micro delay. Peter and I will not speak over each other, but if it sounds like we're speaking over each other, I'm telling you, it's that micro delay in the recording. But that is my disclaimer. Yeah, disclaimer for this that we're on Zoom. You want to share where you're at? You're up in the.
I'm in Bernal Heights, San Francisco. It's lovely here.
Yeah, San Francisco, and I'm down in Los Angeles, and we're talking because your film. I met you when you brought your film when Mama and Me lived outside to Film Invasion Los Angeles in June of 2023. A wonderfully made animated film that I might even tell someone it's almost like an animated documentary, but and Peter's nodding, so he agrees with me. But I'm also proud to say that when Mama and Me lived outside took home the Grand Jury Award for Best Short Film Animation, and it won an award for Tiny Gray-Garcia for Outstanding Screenplay Animation. In this case, the screenplay was literally a book, correct?
Yeah, she wrote a children's book. And see, I've known Tiny and her work at Poor Magazine for years, and Poor Magazine is really a great place. They're essentially doing the same work that the Black Panthers and the Zapatistas were doing, which is educating kids, feeding people, helping people with housing and things like that. And so I wanted to make a film about her, but I didn't want it to come from an outsider. So I was much more trying to help them make a film about themselves. But that wasn't working either because they're just too darn busy and most of them are not filmmakers anyways. So I came across her book and I said, Tiny, this is a perfect solution. All I have to do is take, because it's a children's book, it's full of illustrations. I just need to animate the illustrations. You have a radio station, just go read the text, record it in your radio station and send it to me. What music would you like? And then I can put it together and we have this whole thing that tells your story, and it would be short, it would be inexpensive, it would cost almost nothing. And because we have almost nothing, both of us. So it just turned out great. She said, as far as I said, choose your music, but I won't include any lyrics. And she says, well, Gracias por la vida was a song by Violeta Parra, and she loves that. And so my friend learned it. When I was finishing the editing of the film, I had my friend watch the film a bunch of times, playing guitar, doing variations on the song. And then we went into the recording studio and she watched it and played along. And so she did this very expressive interpretation of the song as a soundtrack, which I really liked. And it's just this nice little 8-minute condensed version of Tiny's childhood and, you know, how she, you know, what made her who she is and why she does the wonderful work she does today. We ended up winning at 24 film festivals. And every time we would go to one, Tiny would go as well. And she would meet with all the local indigenous people and all the local groups for unhoused people. And she would coordinate with them and she would try to teach them how they pulled their money, bought property, and build their own homes on them. And they're not tiny homes. They're kind of medium-sized, comfortable homes. And they're working, this is called the Homefulness Effort, and they're working on Homefulness 2 in Oakland right now. But they also have people that they've talked to who are now doing homefulness efforts in cities all over. And we use touring with the film as a way to make that happen. And it was just such a great thing. So powerful, really couldn't be so pleased and honored.
That really is wonderful that the film not only help to spread the message of the book, but that you added on that Homefulness project and expanded it through a festival run. That actually really could not be more poetically lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a great little film. I don't know when Tiny will release it to the public, but I do want everybody to see it. So it's very simple animation. You know, Pixar has nothing to worry about as far as my animation goes. It's just manipulating segments.
It is simple, but I'm going to interrupt you just to share that it's actually still quite beautiful and inventive because what you did of not just, some people might have just panned over the images, but you did depth and perspective and pulled images out
Yeah.
and it was done with thoughtfulness and care. So it definitely conveys well visually as a film. It's not just it really is a unique piece in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. I tend to agree. I think, and I'm really pleased, of course, that Tiny has always been very pleased with the film and shows it to her friends and family a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, if she ever wants it, I will try to if she decides to put it out into the world of digital streaming and stuff. Keep in mind that I'm involved in some of those things, so I'd be happy to facilitate it, happy to
Right.
make it happen because
I'll
it's a
send her an
special
email.
film. It's a great film,
Yeah.
and I mean, it meant something to me as a viewer and a festival programmer, but obviously it means much more to the team that made it. But do you want to? So I normally do the way I do the podcast is I do ask for the filmmakers a bit of your personal history to see what went on with you before you came to this project, both as filmmaking and as a creative person. I don't know if you were often a storyteller as a young person, or if you found the medium of film and then turned to storytelling. But do you want to share a bit of your creative journey?
Yeah, I always knew I had to do something different from my life. The teachers always told me I was essentially the smart kid, and at 7, I became aware of life enough to start thinking that everybody around me was talking about really superficial things, and that I felt like no one was talking about things that had any meaning. And I was 7, so I was precocious, and I started behaving the way that disillusioned kids, say in junior high school, behaved. And if you had explained to me what a Beat Generation person was and what nihilism was, I'm sure I would have put on a beret and started playing the bongo drums. So it just was really something had to be done. And especially the home situation was so horrible that I needed a way out. So
So you were
I,
a brilliant kid in a rough personal situation at home,
yeah, it was
and the
actually,
intelligence and you were able to use your intelligence to really at a very young age at 7 to start
yeah,
seeing beyond all that.
it was actually systematic torture, and virtually no one like me survives. So I actually have a lot of cool old man insights into the world, and I can tell people very important things about life just because I survived this and went through it and saw a lot of things. So part of the challenge is I see things and I interpret them because I have this different background. How do I bridge the gap between myself and other people and kind of bring them into the experience? And also, I'm not interested in making people feel bad, like bringing up the bad things that happen. And that's not going to help anyone. Much more like, what is the human experience? Where can we find commonality? And what can we do to get ourselves out of this mess that um, ego, narcissism, capitalism, um, fear-based thinking, ignorance has gotten us into? Is there a way out? because we're kind of in the middle of, that I didn't realize as a kid, being one of the very few kids I knew who liked Star Trek, that the Prime Directive is really very deep, and we're doing it right now. The Prime Directive would say that a civilization should be allowed to destroy itself if it has more badness than good in it, that they need to reach a crisis point, that they need to sort it out. And if they can't sort it out, they should not be rescued, because then they'll just spread their malignance into the rest of the galaxy. And so we're doing that right now. We're in the middle of either destroying ourselves or learning how to do it right and save ourselves. And I have no idea which way it'll go. Right now, things do look really bad. But I do remember that there's this really curious phenomenon that I just have seen all my life. And it sounds too simple to be true, but it just seems like everything that's evil has all of its strengths in the short term and all of its weaknesses in the long term. And everything that's good and every effort that's good is the exact opposite. And people have referenced this, that the lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. Well, that is true, and it only addresses the short run. Dr. King's famous statement, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards the truth, does address both the long term and the short term, and I would agree with that. And so right now we're seeing a lot of short term evil winning. But I also see that evil things always sow the seeds of their own destruction, and I see that happening now. So, for instance, to take power as an evil person, you need other evil people, but there's fortunately a limited supply. So you need people that you have talked into believing this is right. Those are the true believers. So then you have this kind of two-class system in your evil effort. The people at the top who know it's evil, and the true believers who may literally be delusional people below them. And then what happens is, though, as the power structure goes on long enough, is you need those true believers in the controlling system, or they demand power in the controlling system. And now you have people, driving the effort, who are a mix of the people who know the real game and the true believers who actually start, without meaning to, sabotage the effort then, because they're true believers, and they can't get rid of the true believers because they need them. And so power structures weaken themselves. I studied Nazi Germany extensively to learn about the power structure and to see where it got its strengths and weaknesses. And you could say the same things right from the beginning. They were sowing the seeds of their own destruction. When I was a kid, there was this myth that Nazi Germany was a highly efficient state. It was a highly inefficient state. That's, again, Star Trek, the Star Trek Nazi episode. Presented them as an efficient state, and that was just so wrong. That's such a terrible episode. Anyways, moving right along from Star Trek, what's your next question?
So much to share. I will actually ask you a question about yourself in a moment, but I do actually have to, besides, I was nodding like crazy while you were speaking there, because I think you are on target in every way. And you made me feel better, actually, because in context, I will share, we are recording this on Thursday, November 21st, which means it was just over 2 weeks ago that the USA had what a lot of people felt was a pivotal election. But also what you're saying about evil and the dishonest amongst humanity, they do need to find other people like that, but they can never get along with each other either, right? Like you can't, I mean, Putin in the end has had to turn and had to kill everyone who supported him at some, if you support him, you are signing your own death sentence.
Well, that just described U.S. foreign policy too. So because, we use people in the Middle East, and then when they're not,
and then eventually they attack us because, you know what I mean.
We put them in a corner, and then they attack us, and then we use them, and then when they're not useful, we destroy them and literally kill them. So that's U.S. foreign policy. The other piece of old man wisdom that I think you can get in when Mama and me lived outside is I've discovered that if you run into a person who has a very long history of deep and broad suffering and no respite from it, that they end up having only three paths they can choose from. And other people who've had suffering intermittently may not relate to this. And I don't want to put down any suffering. All suffering is important and all suffering is sad. But when it's just unrelenting in every dimension, including time, then the person will have only three choices. The first choice is suicide. And I would not tell a person not to do it, but I would strongly advise them to study the second and third paths before they choose the first. The second path is to say, what happened to me was extremely unfair and terrible and unacceptable. And these statements are true. But then the person says, and now that makes me really hurt and angry, and I will fight back. And that ends up becoming ego based. And then the person kind of careens very often into the first path. So the movie Scarface shows that the person on the second path careening into the first path and being killed. The third path is when the person agrees with what the person says at the beginning of the second path, but then says, well, wait a minute, I'm not the only one suffering. Look at all the suffering around me. Why is there suffering? Why is there so much suffering? Shouldn't, I'm not more important than others. Maybe their suffering is bad and my suffering is bad, and we should all have a better world. And so that person then decides that all human suffering is their suffering, and all of their suffering is all human suffering. And the third path then is the only path that has a possibility for love, a possibility for success as a human being, outside of money, where you feel content and you feel happy with where you are. It's the only path that offers that. But there's also a secret. This is actually the most important part. The second path is the easiest to start. It's the hardest to continue. It's so tempting, like someone does something to hurt someone, and I can easily feel rage and I want to take violence against the perpetrator, right? So it's really easy to see that. The third path is the hardest to start, but the easiest to continue. So because of what happened in my childhood, every morning I wake up in pain, and it's fairly recent that I started waking up without screaming. I would wake up screaming regularly for many years, off and on. But I have to meditate immediately and kind of get through it. And I can feel how easy it would be to take the second path. But I keep going on the third path. And you can see the results of Tiny's work on the third path with when Mama and me lived outside. To be very clear to viewers, it's her real life childhood. She wrote it. She narrated the film. I directed the film and animated the film. And I think that's actual real wisdom. I think people should really think about the three paths. And it really helps, it helps white folks understand their Black and Indigenous friends better. Anybody who's been through systematic racism and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I'm going to ask a question that does sort of shift in that.
Good.
In your youth, at what point did you discover the arts and how the arts can play in your life? Because clearly you are at the meeting point between activism and the arts.
Yeah, I always loved music, and I always loved all kinds of art. My mother took up painting when she was about 40, and she died at 51, so never got fantastic at it, but got very good, and it was always very inspiring. She was excellent with charcoal, even with only 10 or 11 years before she passed. I was taught that I couldn't do anything, that I was smart, but I was incapable of doing anything constructive anywhere. So I didn't believe I could do art. I probably would have become like a musician or something if that hadn't happened. Instead, I fell into what many frustrated musicians become, which is a filmmaker. And I remember being a teenager and seeing the first Star Wars movie and going, well, this movie is good, but not great. But what it is good at is really firing people up. And so I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker because there's got to be ways of firing people up that also had, Star Wars isn't bad or anything, but and that first Star Wars movie, like if you really like if you loved it as a kid and you watch it carefully and as an adult, you're going like, what?
Although I'm going to share with you, I have one thing I love to say about the first Star Wars, which was because Star Wars kind of ruined science fiction in its own way, but science fiction had always been a way to discuss an important issue of the day, but make it safe for the public by setting it in the future, right? Or setting it
Right.
somewhere else.
Right.
And I've said that to people and they say, well, what about Star Wars? I go, Star Wars is so obviously about the nuclear holocaust, right? The Death Star is just the idea of blowing up an entire planet. And it's the idea, and it's a childish fantasy that like, oh, let's destroy the weapon that can destroy an entire planet.
Yeah,
So
well, Lucas said it's about Vietnam.
Yeah.
Lucas said it's about Vietnam and the American Empire. So
Mm.
yeah. So it's a political film.
Yeah. But 5 minutes into the next film, they made it clear that it was just about making money and selling toys. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But still it's fascinating that Star Wars inspired you, but it was equally inspiring because for those who were unaware and weren't alive at the time, I mean, it truly was. Jaws might have been the first blockbuster, but Star Wars was an unbelievable phenomenon. I mean, it was just people lined up around city blocks for months watching that film over and over and repeat viewing. And
and people doing cosplay and all that kind of science fiction festival stuff now is like, oh yeah, that's everyone. But it wasn't everyone then. It wasn't happening then. And the studio was like, Lucas, what's this crazy film that's going on too long and over budget and some kind of space opera? Can you just get it done? Like we're going to have a meeting soon. And if it's not done by then, we're yanking it, And so he finishes up and nobody knows what to do with it. And I remember the first log line for the film, which I heard on the radio commercials when I was a teenager. And it was, never has anyone spent so much money just for fun, because they were kind of advertising as an expensive fantasy movie. So it's a terrible way to advertise a movie, but they didn't need it because the word of mouth brought everyone in. And yeah, there were just huge lines going for 2 or 3 blocks, people in costume and all that. Anyways, we're talking about the wrong subject now.
In theory, well, it's okay, but that was an inspiration. So at what point that inspired you then? How did you go about getting into visual arts and filmmaking? Was it? I
started taking Super 8 classes in community college and studying film. Then I started.
Which I'm going to interrupt again, but that's actually a wonderful time, right? Yeah. It's wonderful that you got to work with physical film because it's a higher discipline, I think, than what goes on today digitally. But
I think it's got pluses and minuses, and not only that, but then I took some time off, became a punk rock kid, basically eating mushrooms, drinking beer, and stage diving, and for about a year. And then I went back to school and I studied film history at San Francisco State University, but they were a really good documentary film college. So I petitioned to get into the production emphasis program. And then I was shooting and cutting 16 millimeter film. So that was fun. For my senior project, my girlfriend and I slept under a flatbed for a week at this place south of Market, waking up and having fun with each other, and then editing, and then going back and eating, and then going a full circle again. And we did this for a full week to edit that film. So that was a lot of fun. But I do love digital. And then I went back to school to study digital. I took a year at City College, and then I took color grading course. I'm about to take another. I'm about to sign up for one today. This one's really advanced. I want my work to look really, really beautiful in the future. Um, so I'm about to take another. And so I'm really excited. The thing that's been the pattern of my life in the last decade has that I've been getting better and better, happier and happier, more and more stable, while the world's been falling apart more and more. So I feel like I am the portrait of Dorian Gray for the entire world.
That is, well, that's one way to look at it. Um, and in that era where you were working with 16 and stuff, com completing shorts was was your was the subject of those documentaries already
No,
in line with what it would become?
no, actually, I am most interested in narrative film and fiction film. But, you know, starting in about 1980, I realized that the US was getting worse and more right wing, and really wanted to join movements that would help counter that. But there was nothing even approaching critical mass that I saw. And so then Occupy started. And I thought, I wish that would happen here. And then it did. I heard that there was an Occupy here in San Francisco, and I just ran down. And then because they had committees, and I was only one of the few people who would join committees, I became the de facto head of media for Occupy San Francisco and would, coordinate with other photographers and videographers. And so we would cover an event. And so we'd have the photographers kind of spread out this way and the videographers that way and our live streamers this way. And we did that. And ever since Occupy, I've been making all these super fast documentaries. And some of them won a couple awards too. And they're really interesting. And it's a different kind of filmmaking. And everybody's saying, like, where's your film, Peter? We need it now. And so it taught me to edit really fast instead of very thoughtfully and carefully. And so there was a lot to learn from that, but the world has changed again, and I really need a new direction again. So I'm really searching for that direction now, but the difference now and when I've had the search in the past is that in the past that's been very worrying. In the past that's been very anxious, not knowing exactly what you want to do next. Now it's actually pretty exciting, and I have a lot of confidence that I'm going to find something good. I started making a series of films about an oil company executive, and I really liked the first one, which was kind of a proof of concept one. It's just a minute and a half long, and that just won its second award. And I really wanted to do a series about him, starring him, because he's really an interesting person. He's really funny, and he has that big salesman smile, and he's simultaneously telling you that climate change is fake and fake news and it's not real, but it's also something that they've been working on stopping for a really long time diligently as oil company executives. So he's very funny. But now with what's been happening, I don't know if continuing that effort is right or not. I'm kind of looking at, again, my whole history as a filmmaker is how do I interface with people, with the populace, especially because their experiences are in some ways very similar and in other ways very dissimilar than mine. How do I reach across this chasm between me and the rest of humanity? And I love my raw ideas. I just don't know what to do next, except I know I'm taking this class because I want my films to look more beautiful.
Right on the technical side. You said that you were always interested in it. I'm just to clarify, the oil company executive, that's documentary? That's an actual person, or is that a character? That's a fictional character you create?
Yeah, his name's Steve ExxonMobil, and he's with the American Petroleum Institute. And the first one, the proof of concept video, is the plot is simply that he's talking to the audience and reassuring them that everything's going to be fine, but he just happens to be packing his bags. And then he ends up dashing out of the room, and he says, sorry, kids, no room for you. And we get this quick reaction shot of the kids. And then he runs downstairs and there's a sign on the door that says bunker and he locks himself in. And,
I mean, that's a pretty good start.
and I really do want people to ask themselves, why are all the billionaires building themselves luxury bunkers? Why are they telling you, oh, I'm going to fix everything, but by the way, I'm building a luxury bunker? Because they're all doing it. And there must be some reason they don't like spending money unless it's something that they feel gives them benefit. So there must be some reason they feel they need luxury bunkers.
No, I've become a fan of the genre cli-fi, climate change science fiction, and yeah, I read I think it was just called The Future, but yeah, it was actually about that, about the bunkers and things, and
yeah, I have three more scripts about this guy and the fourth one that I'm writing right now. So he's really interesting, but is he the next person I should go with? I really like him. I really like that. Again, I can use humor to talk about something difficult.
yeah, it's excellent use of humor. I was going to ask, between the era at San Francisco State and whatnot, and Occupy, were there narrative films in there? Were you doing some narratives in there?
Very few. I ended up doing a documentary for a group. I kept getting sucked into documentary because there's certain kinds of documentaries that are cheap where you can just grab a camera and run outside and start shooting. So I also had, because of my personal struggles, I had real poverty concerns, was really wrestling with that for a long time. And so I'm just really happy to be on my feet now. And I'm in a great cheap place, so I'm still housing insecure. If anything happens to this housing, I could easily become unhoused again. But this place, as long as it lasts, is great. There's a great cat here, great housemate here. There's a view of a park outside my room. It's like this place should cost 3 or 4 times more than what I'm paying, I think. So my place right now in the world is I'm really, things are looking up. I just got a microloan, a zero interest microloan, and I'm buying more gear. Just bought my new M4 MacBook Pro for the next round of stuff I'll be doing. And I just love learning more and more. There's always new things coming in filmmaking, and there's always more to learn. So I'm just always studying and always watching someone's video on, here's the new features in DaVinci Resolve Studio.
And another always is you're always involved in activism, and as soon as people around you hear about your skill set with film, they turn to you and say, "Hey, shoot something for us." It sounds like
that happens often, and actually in the last few months, as I focus on making sure that I maintain my housing and build up my business, I've been doing a lot less activism. And so the other thing I have to decide now is, do I dive back in a really big way as I did before, or are there other things calling to me? I just want to do whatever my heart says I'm supposed to be doing, even if I don't quite understand it. I often, as part of my meditation, I've trained myself to make decisions without knowing the exact reason why. Or if I just get a strong positive feeling that says, turn left at this corner, I do. And I don't know why. And it just always turns out to be a good thing.
and it's certainly yeah, if the activism, it is still a form of activism to create narrative films and fiction that makes a valid point. It truly is a way to reach more humans.
Yeah, and every film is political. If you say I don't like political films, that's a political statement. If you make Rambo is a political film, but nobody wants to call it a political film. and so forth. There's all kinds of, evasions of questions. That's political. Confronting questions. That's political. Um, so it's just a matter of where you are with that. How much are you speaking from a place of privilege? How much are you really trying to get down into the subject and really understand it and wrestle with it?
Yeah, yeah, and people and the decision. I agree with you because the decision to make a film that ignores uh, things like representation and other things that some people are heavily in support of and some people are heavily against right now. They're making themselves very loud. But yes, it is certainly a privilege to make a film where you completely say, "Oh, I'm not dealing with any of that." Like that's like you said, it's a political statement to say, "I wanted to make just a funny film and I'm not going to have any politics in it whatsoever." Is a political decision, like you said.
Yeah. And one of the things you can watch is if people really give their imaginations freedom to do anything, how that works. So, for instance, when the Monty Python troupe got together, they said that everybody was doing political comedy, and so they decided they needed to not do political comedy on purpose. But stuff came out, would just come out. There was an Eric Idle sketch uh, where they had all these political theorists from the past on like one panel, so you could interview Karl Marx and Mao Zedong and all these people. But then, as soon as they start, it turns out it's a game show, and they just ask them like, "Can you name this song in 3 notes?" And so it was a political satire on how the dominant media just commodifies everything and takes anything with any importance and just squeezes all the importance out of it and makes it into blandness, right? And so, and he wasn't trying to do a political piece, I don't think. I think he was just thinking of those things, and it just all came out. So I do love that. I love it when I write something that just springs out of me and I'm not even sure where it came from.
Well, and I grew up a huge Monty Python fan from Flying Circus, which oddly only got to us in the USA through PBS, I recall. It took public broadcasting for us to get the best sketch comedy show ever made.
Yeah.
But besides I mean, The Holy Grail is a wildly political film if you consider the importance of King Arthur in British tradition. And then Life of Brian is one of the greatest things ever made, and it's nonstop brilliant political commentary.
Yeah.
In a funny way that is digestible. I'm sure there are some people who are fans who don't get any of it, but my goodness, like talk about a work of art that is truly political and entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, George Harrison saved that film by throwing Wendy into it, wasn't he great?
I almost, when you brought up Python, I almost brought up the fact that like even if they were their intention was to not be like all the political comics around them, comedians around them, like George Harrison said, they carried on the tradition of the Beatles, rebelling against authority while being accepted by the authority, I guess is. But I believe George Harrison said, like, no band carried on the Beatles tradition. Monty Python carried on the Beatles. Yes, he's. Well, I mean, whatever. I've been a lifelong Beatles fan, so I might be biased. But the most expensive movie ticket ever purchased was George Harrison writing the check to make Life of Brian because no studio would touch it.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody wanted to do that. I'm so glad they did it. And it was a cheap film, too. I love films where you're going like, okay, how do they save money? I know they were working with a very low budget, so here's what they did. Oh, I see what they did here. Oh, wow. Or what's the famous Japanese film from about 20 years ago where the guy wanted to shoot in Hong Kong and didn't want to get any permits, and so he shot at 12 frames per second to make sure that his camera had enough light, and then he has this whole arty sequence in Hong Kong. And people are like, wow, that's really beautiful. How did you think of that? Well, I didn't have enough light, so I said, let's shoot at 12 frames per second.
I gotta look that one up. I'm not familiar with
I'm
it.
trying to remember famous. I have a bad memory for names, but famous filmmaker, and I just love it when you have a problem and the way you save it makes you more creative and where you do something more interesting.
No, and that's actually, yeah, that, well, boy, talk about a thing often having limits that you must work within is when creativity truly
Yeah,
flourishes.
yeah. Like Jack White likes to talk about that a lot. Um, Sometimes people put constraints on themselves. I'm really excited about my future, and I have real ideas about characters I want to do, and I want to do um, more fundraising so that I can make more films, especially more fiction films. I'm pretty sure that will be an important part. The next film that I'm working on now, that was a documentary, I managed to get footage of a famous activist, David Hartso, who's in his 80s and retiring. And I think I got footage of him getting his very last arrest. And then I did a long interview with him. And so I'm cutting them together very carefully and slowly, since that's the opposite of how I had to work with Occupy. And I'm really, really happy with it. He um, was with a group of Quakers who met JFK, and he's got interesting stories there. He met Dr. King. Um, he was one of the people at the Woolworths counter. In fact, one of his stories is a guy coming in and holding a switchblade in front of his heart and saying, "You have 2 seconds to leave or I'll kill you." And he didn't leave. And how that all worked out, that's in the film. And so he's very, very brave, nonviolent activist, really an archetype for that kind of person. And he's in his 80s now, so he's retiring because of health issues and things like that. And so I'm really excited about that. But most of my films after that, I'm really looking at fiction, my first love again.
Right, right. And that was partially the reason for the proof of concept about the oil executive story.
Yeah, because my original idea was to make a bunch about him, but then like the whole world changed, everything, the genocide, um, and all of that. Just changed everything and changed everybody's outlook and changed everybody's mood and changed everybody's perspective. And so I, there's a great channel on YouTube called Let's Talk Religion, and I like watching that because it really is teaching about how different. I love learning how power structures rise and fall, what makes them work and what makes them stop working. And so the part of the late antiquity apocalyptic thinking and all the literature around it is something that that person discusses on their channel a lot. And I kind of see people turning to apocalyptic thinking now. And a lot of that is not quite rational, but it can easily become self-fulfilling prophecy, which is the danger.
Sure, sure, yeah. And I mean, I'm not perceptive for repeating what I hear a lot, but clearly, historically, every generation has thought they're the last.
Mhm.
Right? Most generations are like, "This is the end. I'm so important that there won't be anything coming after me." And the truth is, as you quoted Dr. King and said about other things, no, the train keeps moving.
It could stop moving. It could keep moving without humanity. It
Oh
could,
yeah.
like people are saying the world is in danger. The world is not in danger. Humanity is in danger. The world will keep going. There are ways out of this, but essentially, I see capitalism destroying itself, but not quickly enough. And if it would just destroy itself more quickly, that would be it. As an activist, what I was working on was the idea that activists have to work on two major projects, and some will work on one or the other, some will work on both. But one is The evil in the power structure is weakening it and destroying it, but because it's not fast enough, we work on weakening it more at its weakest points. The other effort is because the power structure is already in the beginning stages of collapse, we need something else. And so the other thing is like what Tiny does, which is building the new system, building the new mutual aid networks, building the new sources for housing and food to replace the old ones as they fall apart. And they'll be taking away they've already taken away infrastructure repair for the most part. They are taking away rights more and more. They're building cop cities in every city to enforce this. It's really interesting because as a activist, I've noticed, white liberals don't really care because they understand that those cop city torture centers will be used on Black and Indigenous people and brown people first. And that's the thing. The thing that white liberals really don't want to admit is that it will be used on them or their kids later. Now that we've normalized genocide, it's not going to stop just being used on brown people alone. That's a fact. And so things will get worse before they get better. But if you really look at the history of how evil things destroy themselves, there's really a lot of good news in there. They just need to collapse faster than they are because they're, first of all, genocidal wars that make climate change so much worse than it already is, and so forth. So those are the efforts, and those are the kinds of things I think about. And I'm sure right now there are people mad at me by saying some of those things, but
But that's fine. But I wanted to add that what you said about Tiny and about yes, it is actually so important to work on the alternatives.
Yeah.
Because it was the lack of alternatives when people perhaps, I mean, something is happening globally right now where governments are all being voted out. Incumbency is a huge drawback. So people actually vote for they support something they don't truly believe in because they don't see an alternative to it.
Right.
And that was a huge failure in my opinion, in our recent election, was that an alternative wasn't provided.
Right.
So that people voted in ways that some experts did not expect.
Right.
Because they were like, oh, no matter what, that group will vote blue, and this group will vote blue, and that group will vote blue, no matter what we do.
You're paraphrasing Chuck Schumer. Yeah. He said, well, we'll lose these votes here, but we'll gain them all back over there. And basically, every Beltway journalist lives in a bubble made of money and has no connection to, like Jake Tapper saying that he's going to start muting people who are not objective about what's going on in the Middle East. And someone wrote back, so you can mute yourself? Because these people are propagandists. They're not journalists. We have very little in the way of journalism in this country anymore. Anyways, I'm sorry I interrupted. And journalism has been replaced, as you point out, by propaganda and social media. Like every communication tool has been used for propaganda, as I recall. Mm-hmm. I recall a historian saying that the when the Gutenberg press was first invented, it was all lies and propaganda being spread. That's all it was used for at first. Is that what you call the Bible?
Oh, well.
I'm not going there.
Yeah. Certainly. Well,
because he was most famous for the Bibles, of course, but that was not all that was printed. You're right.
No. Yeah. But apparently the other stuff was worse. If you went back and looked, it's probably about all the witches in your community and how you must find them and throw them in water. And if they sink, okay, they weren't a witch. And if they float, they're a witch. You got to burn them.
Right. One of the biggest beneficiaries was Martin Luther, and he was a misogynist and an anti-Semite. Oh my goodness, it was real bad with him, that stuff. But the printing press really did help the Protestant revolution.
Yeah, it did. And I guess in 30 to 50 to 100 years, we'll be able to truly understand how humanity came out on the other side of social media if we do. But it certainly is concerning. It concerns me as an older person too, that my relatives, my nieces and nephews and people in their 20s, all their information is misinformation that they get through TikTok, honestly. They don't listen to my podcast, so I can say that.
Yeah.
But they say things to me, and
I
I'm like, have you fact? But then you can't fact check it because if you type in what you want, you'll get confirmation bias and you'll be told what the propaganda was correct.
I had a deadhead, peace and love deadhead, come up to me and say that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are communists who want open borders, which is like, wow. So you're here to tell me you don't know what the word communist means and you don't know what the phrase open borders means. So yeah, I mean, he's deported more people than Trump did in his first administration. No.
And as someone in the Bay
Communist?
Area, you're familiar with her history,
Very much, yeah.
and that she was so he was believing exactly what their opponents were saying about them.
Yeah, and there's no love lost between me and the corporate Democrats, that's for sure. But they're not communists, and they don't want open borders, and they're in no way a part of the left. Just read what Malcolm X said about liberalism. Anyways, um, so I do think that humanity is at the point now where we're finally going to learn to do it right, or we're going to destroy ourselves. I know that there's a long history of apocalyptic thinking. I know that most of it is unjustified. I know around in the late 900s, people were saying, "Oh, look at the date. We're all going to be destroyed." And during the Great Plagues, it was that way. But with what's happening with the climate, the fact that luxury bunkers will not work because you'd have to be down there for 300 years. And so all that means is you and your friends are going to die at each other's throats because you're out of claustrophobia and paranoia. Um, so I really think that we're going to learn to do it right, or we're going to save the galaxy from our evil the hard way. So one or the other, and I think that will inform the future scripts that I do, and I hope my stuff has a lot of humor in it, and I hope it's very engaging. I hope it's, agitprop is fun, but I hope that it really engages people for thinking and like, have you thought about this? What do you think about this? Why do you think this is happening? Kind of thing. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited about my own future for some reason.
That's wonderful. That's probably a good moment to close on, maybe.
Yeah.
Is there
Sure.
right? Because if we go longer, we can bring ourselves down again, and that was a nice that was a nice. Maybe
Sure.
I'm revealing my emotional need to end on something nice, but I can own that.
Okay, there we go.
Is there I mean, you've mentioned so many wonderful things from the Hopefulness Project to Poor Magazine to this and that. If you give me links to all those organizations, we can make sure to put them in the show notes of this so that anyone
Sure.
listening can jump right to theirs. Is there another website or social media that people should do you embrace that stuff, or are you not on there?
I did, and now I am finding it less useful. That's one of the changes. I started using what is it, Blue Sky, when you had to have an invite code, and now, of course, thanks to Elon's incompetence, it's getting really big over on Blue Sky, and I do like Blue Sky, but I just don't see right now the huge benefit. What I'll probably do is use my proof of concept film as a way of saying, look, I wrote this, I directed this, I was the cinematographer. So let's all raise some money together, and I would like to direct my new film, and you can look at the script or something. And I think that's one of the ways forward. I'm just not absolutely positive that I'm running with Steve ExxonMobil, but I do. He and his kids are great. Um, his kids end up not agreeing with him very strongly. Uh, so I just don't know which film I'm going to make yet, and I'm going to try to learn the meaning of all that when I'm taking this next class from this woman who makes really beautiful images. Um, and then, yeah, I just really want to engage the world. I really want to interact with it in a way that not quite giving it a hug, much more interactive. Saying a hug is too static. Something like really love the world, not shake the world. That's more violent. Something like really engage the world where we're kind of becoming one. And it's kind of forming in my head. Really excited about that.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right. Well, I'll go through my closing spiel to wrap us up where I mention all the things. It's funny. I was I hopped onto Blue Sky. I can't remember when I hopped on, but I admittedly don't post anything. I just lurk. But so be it. And sadly I do have, well, I'm one of those people who feels like I have to be on the social media things because the film festivals and whatnot. But my personal feed is a bit cowardly. It's just pets and trees. I have a fruit garden. I love sharing my fruit. When there's a beautiful avocado on the tree I planted, I'm like, I want to share this with my friends. But
That's a way to change the world too. That's like showing beautiful things, celebrating beautiful things. Every morning I wake up and celebrate how cool the cat is and how beautiful the park nearby is. I We have a terrace garden that we keep native plants in, and I take care of the bird baths to keep them clean because the birds here in the city during the non-rainy season have problems finding water, and they not only need water for drinking, they don't splash in water just for fun. They also do it because that's how they get parasites off them. So if they can only drink water and it's some oily puddle on the ground, that ain't good. And so it's really beautiful. It makes me feel, you know, I would make all of you feel happy and loved and valued right now if I could. Every single person listening to my voice, if I could just do that and make you all feel like you are loved like every human being deserves to be loved, I would just do it. And I can't, but I can with the cat. So I do all the things here, and I think about this consciously. This is what I would do to humans if I could. You know, I cuddle with the cat and I scratch the cat the way that cats like it. And that's what I would do. Like if we lived in a sane society, I could walk down the street, and because men were not the jerks that they are, I would be able to just scratch people like where they like to be scratched, like I do to the cat, you know, or hug people. Remember, just imagine if you could walk down the street and you could just randomly hug people and it wouldn't be weird, right? Well, I can do that with animals, so I do. And my indigenous friends say, you should be talking to animals. So for decades now, I have been. I always talk to every animal that I see. I say good morning to the birds. There's coyotes in the park, and I ask the coyotes to be careful. And things like that. I had a long conversation with a red-tailed hawk who tried to take over our terrace garden. And I was saying, you know, I care about you and your life, and you need to feed your babies. But if you take up camping here, none of the other birds can come here. And so I need to ask her to leave. And I kept gently confronting her until she flew away. And so, yeah, I think there's all kinds of positive things to find in this mess of a world still.
Agreed. All right. And well, I will continue on my previously stated mission of sharing the things to wrap up the podcast.
Great.
But what can I know it's not perfect, but I'll add that this podcast is solar powered, where this I am fortunate enough to be married to someone who does well enough that we could afford to put solar up.
Yay.
And it gives me unending pleasure to know that besides we haven't had an electric bill for over a year because we put up a huge enough array. It's funny because the solar installers argued with me about how many panels. They said that's too much, and I said you don't understand. I want to convert everything in our home to the. I was like, don't tell me to do less. So we did, and we bank enough to make it through the winter on our credit, credit we build. But it's a nice feeling knowing that the computer screens and shit in front of me, the sun's out. Photons from the sun are powering this recording.
Yay! Yay!
Which beats the shit out of fossil fuel, right?
Yes, it's slightly better than fossil fuel.
Even if I obviously can't even emotionally deal with the manufacturing of the solar panels, but at least for the next 20, 30 years, for my remaining days here on the planet, our home has solar. Anyway, all right, so yeah, it's something. Okay. And I didn't even mention my friend, but I won't. All right, so this is the Discover Indie Film Podcast. If you will, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, review, be kind. Kindness is in short supply, so there's a lot of trolls out there. A lot of people take the time to complain. They don't take the time to be kind. So please do that. If you want to learn more about this podcast, go to discoverindiefilm.com, and it's at DIFwins on social media. Oddly enough, I haven't expanded that to Blue Sky yet, or that stupid Threads thing. I just called it stupid. That's not nice. All right, and we mentioned that Peter's film When Mama and Me Lived Outside was at Film Invasion Los Angeles in 2023. If you want to learn more about that festival that we hold every June, go to filminvasionla.com, and it's at Film Invasion LA on social media. It does have a sister festival every December. That's the Sherman Oaks Film Festival. You can learn about that one at shermanoaksff.com, and it's at Sherman Oaks FF on social media. And the last thing I'm supposed to mention is the Indie Channel. That's my own. I'm involved in an effort to help independently made films get out to the public and hopefully reap some benefits. It's actually is with the small s socialist concept where the gross receipts are shared evenly among all the filmmakers regardless of views, clicks, completions, because every film on there is contributing to the success of the channel. So we just split it all evenly, and so in its own way we're trying to provide an alternative to other distribution methods. We'll see. So please check out the Indie Channel. If you have a smart TV, it's an app on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, and Android TV. It's also on your smartphone. I guess I need to accept that people will watch films on their phones. I sometimes ask them not to, but some people don't have a TV and they just have a phone, so whatever. It is what it is. And you can learn more about it if you go to indiechannel.tv. That's the website. So, Peter, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Indie.tv. Sounds great.
Yeah, indiechannel.tv.
Indiechannel.tv.
Indie Channel. That is obviously if Tiny wants her film on there. Absolutely. And we even have some wonderful filmmakers who choose to have their equal share of the gross receipts. They say, don't send that to me. Use the PayPal of such and such nonprofit. And I'm like, oh boy, you guys you're really on board. So anyway, that's my closing spiel and argument. So I'll thank Peter again, and I'll thank everyone for listening.